Sakamoto Days has been putting out a consistently good story week over week for pretty much the entirety of its runtime. Ask anyone familiar with the series and they're likely to say something along the lines of it's peak or that it's really good, and that praise is very much well deserved. However, beneath all the hype moments, excellent characterization, and incredible choreography lies Sakamoto Days' biggest problem being its rushed endings, and today I wanted to analyze that at length. So what exactly do I mean by rushed endings? Obviously, since the series is still ongoing, I don't mean the end of the entire series. Instead, what I mean by rushed endings applies to specific arcs, the most recent of which being the Okutabi Museum arc. I, along with many other readers, were kind of let down by the ending of this arc, especially when you put the scope of the arc itself along with its importance to the overall story into perspective. At least for as far as we are in the story, the Okutabi Museum arc might as well be Sakamoto Days' version of the Shibuya incident. There was a clear goal set for the three main groups in the story, being Slur's gang, Sakamoto's crew, and the Order, and going into this arc, it was clear that, regardless of the outcomes of everyone's plans, there would be a major status quo shift. Of course, we still got that, with Takamura dying, Nagumo being kicked out of the Order, and the chairman declaring Sakamoto, Uzuki, and Nagumo as Class A extermination targets, but the way we got there has left a lot of fans a little unsatisfied. This isn't to say that the rest of the arc was poorly paced. If anything, it's the complete opposite. Everything leading up to Okutabi's ending was actually, at least in my opinion, really well paced. The gradual plot progression from stopping Mafuyu from getting himself killed to stopping Slur's gang was a natural and satisfyingly done arc. The dozens of fights that occurred in this arc not only felt like they made sense within the context of each group's plans, but they never felt like they overstayed their welcomes, had solid conclusions except for maybe one, and ultimately kept me interested throughout the arc, whether it was to see how a fight concluded or just to see how a certain character was doing. But it's all of this positive, all of this well-paced, well-thought-out storytelling that makes the conclusion to this arc so much harder to bear. At the end of the Okutabi Museum arc, we get a crazy 5v1 between Sakamoto, Nagumo, Uzuki, Gaku, Haruma, and Takamura. This fight is honestly one of my favorites, and its pacing is really good up until the end. Each character that hops in to try their luck against Takamura always looks really cool, and the way Takamura casually bodies them is done with just the right balance so that it still looks like a stomp, but without just being too fast. The problem comes when Uzuki copies Takamura's personality and just one-shots him, which then prompts the arc to just flat out end. We get a small conclusion where Sakamoto tries to carry himself and Nagumo out of the museum before seeing Shin and Kashima, and then there's just a 1 week time skip. Keep in mind, at this point, we still have the question of what happened to Amane and Shishiba, since the last time we saw either of them, it was when Amane was being choked out by Osaragi and Shishiba was dying on the floor. We also had no clue where Kumanomi went or what happened to Siba, Mafuyu, Toramaru, and Kaiji. The first question is partially answered by Shin since he mentions running into Amane who was fleeing Osaragi, and he also mentions Siba's ghost trick, but that's about it. There's no answer to how Shishiba got himself out, where Uzuki and Kumanomi went, what the chairman was doing the entire time, or even where Mafuyu, Toramaru, and Kaiji went. The arc's ending is just incredibly abrupt, and most of those loose ends were either tied up with Shin's blanket statement about everyone being evacuated to safety at either the JCC or elsewhere, or just not tied up at all. While not necessary, we don't see Shishiba leaving the museum, we don't see Amane running from Osaragi, which would have to be seen since Amane is so much weaker than her, and characters like Kashima, Gaku, Kumanomi, and Uzuki all just vanished into thin air. Of course, I'm sure we'll get answers to most of the questions I asked, maybe even by the time you're watching this video, but it doesn't change the fact that these questions should have been answered in the arc they were introduced, especially considering that most of these questions aren't overarching plot-heavy ones and could be very easily answered within this arc. This arc's conclusion unfortunately drops what would have been some generational storytelling into something that was good, arguably great, but definitely not the best. This problem of rushed endings isn't a new one either, since the same complaints were brought up on another very important arc that also had the potential to be amazing. This arc is none other than Sakamoto's flashback. Once again, the problems that are present within the Okutabi Museum arc make themselves known in Sakamoto's flashback. The setup to this arc is great. There's a clear goal for our protagonists, and since readers already know that Rion has to die by the end of the arc, it makes for an interesting reveal when Asaki is introduced as the impetus behind Uzuki's actions against the JA. Sakamoto, Nagumo, Rion, and Uzuki have a really fun dynamic that readers know will make the ending more painful since Rion has to die, and the plot progression is once again done in a natural, satisfying, and interesting way. None of the fights are too dragged on either, and while this arc definitely isn't as action-packed compared to the Okutabi Museum, that ends up working in its favor since Suzuki is able to harness the downtime to develop the characters' relations with each other. But as is the case with the Okutabi arc, all of this positivity is ultimately let down by the lackluster ending. Following Sakamoto's crazy murder of Koba, the poison guy, we get a moment of genuine connection between him, Rion, and Uzuki. Readers are already aware of Uzuki's internal conflict, and this is where that finally boils over. As Uzuki volunteers to find an extra antidote on Koba's body, he gets a call from Gaku and Asaki and finally has enough. He's too conflicted between his own personal desire to keep his friends alive and his own morals that prevent him from killing Kindaka, so he decides to get himself killed by purposefully dropping the antidote. Of course, Kindaka ends up sacrificing himself to catch the antidote and gives it to Uzuki, which Rion sees and immediately confronts him about it. Finally, Uzuki turns and swings on her, to which Sakamoto and Nagumo come to her aid as Uzuki disappears in the smoke. Rion decides to chase after Uzuki alone while Sakamoto and Nagumo get Kindaka, Konomi, and her mom out of the tunnel, and then we get another abrupt time skip. We cut to 3 days later as Sakamoto and Nagumo arrive at a hospital to see Kindaka, and the whole scene simply serves as a further setup to the mystery behind Rion's disappearance and gives Sakamoto and Nagumo a reason to join the order. Right after this, we get another time skip, this time going forward a year, to when Sakamoto and Nagumo finally discover Uzuki's location, and it's revealed that Rion is dead. A fight ensues between Sakamoto and Uzuki that lasts one chapter, and that serves as the conclusion to the flashback arc. Now, I think it's completely fine for Rion's disappearance to not be fully explained. Obviously, since Sakamoto wasn't aware of where she was for a year, we couldn't have exactly gotten that info, and it's clear that Suzuki is setting up for a major reveal for what happened between Uzuki and Rion for the year that they were missing. However, my problem with the ending is more with how fast it transitions from Rion running after Uzuki to Sakamoto and Nagumo just being in the order and discovering Uzuki's hideout. There was plenty of room to show what joining the order was like for Sakamoto and Nagumo, how each of them dealt with Rion's disappearance, especially considering the fact that Nagumo still hasn't gone over it. And overall, I just think that some extra time, even just one chapter spent exploring Sakamoto and Nagumo's lives post-escort mission, could have done wonders for their development and characterization. We could have gotten a chance to see how Sakamoto became the greatest hitman of all time, and some of the antics they got up to while in the order, but instead, the arc is rushed straight to Sakamoto versus Uzuki, and then ends. All in all, while these problems I've highlighted definitely hurt my opinion of these two arcs, I still think they're pretty good. Suzuki might have missed opportunities to flesh out characters or answer questions, but the final product has been entertaining nonetheless. However, I do still think that if Sakamoto Days is to make it big and explode to the heights of a series like JJK, then addressing the issue of rushed arc endings would be super important. If done correctly, I think the next arc could absolutely be incredible generational storytelling, but that'll only come after we fix Sakamoto Days' biggest problem.